So I'm very happy that Dr. Kobe Abayomi is here today. I don't actually know you. I only learned about you by Googling you.
Okay.
So please introduce yourself. Yes.
My name's Kobe Abayomi. Statistician by trade. I guess I would say data science for digital media professional. I run science for a music informatics company. Before that, I was a SVP for data science at Warner Music Group. And before that, I was the director of monetization at Warner Media. So I spent a lot of time thinking about marketing, digitalization of content, and the new opportunities that provides to get things in front of people and figure out what they like. And so that's sort of what this talk is about, some bit of it. So I can just start. Nice, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here virtually in Boulder, Colorado. As I was writing the talk out, I realized that even just this bit is probably going to take up a lot. Maybe there'll be another time and I'll talk about more. The thing that I'm going to talk about mainly here is sort of the use of music as content in digital marketing and how powerful that is given the delivery of music digitally, and a little bit of science, some of the science behind figuring out affinities for audiences for music. All right, so this is the outline of the talk, and I'll go through it. Let me just start the slides. So this first slide here, sort of a riddle that we'll get back to at the end of the talk. What this map is, why I'm asking where the Nigerians are, but it's just suffices to say at the beginning to sort of stoke your imagination. It's illustrative of sort of the power of the volume of people consuming digital content, and us being able, as statisticians and data scientists, to be able to make a lot of inferences about their affinity for that content, and to use that to project and promote that content. So a little bit of jargon from the advertising world. When you talk about an audience, you're usually talking about a particular sort of group of people that you want to send some message to or view some content. Typically, we'll talk about impressions, that's how many people saw the content. And one of the things that's really important with digitalization is the ability to target an audience, meaning that amongst a large group of people, that you're able to select a substrata and have a message be just for them. So a target audience, so this examples here in this illustration, in the ad tech world, is one that shares sort of traits, demographics, the motivations for converting, seeing your ad and buying something, are differentiated across audience targets and segments. So the situation where different people have different preferences and showing them all the same ad wouldn't be effective. You want to show each group a different ad. So this illustration here of a bunch of people, these boxes indicating different targets, and these being different types of fabric softener to go for different types of people. Royale appeals to people in this sort of yellow box. An undifferentiated audience is one where the entire audience receives the same undifferentiated product message. So the creative, the ad that you show them, the content you show them, only needs to appeal to the sort of overall sort of motivation, right? And so this is some standard fabric softener. Doesn't matter who you are, you like fabric softener, you need it. And this is different advertising philosophies. I should say mechanism as well as philosophy. One of the ways this is played out in music, at least in the United States, has been concomitant with consolidation of content platforms in music, in particular, how lots of radio stations. So I'm old enough to remember these are some example radio stations. When I was a kid in New York, in a very differentiated market, each radio station had a very unique sort of product being type of music, genre of music, that they would platform and distribute over the airwaves. These have all gone away. Now, CD 101.9, I think, it's just a website. PLJ was bought out. K-Rock is now, I want to, they might be ESPN now, or is Kiss FM is ESPN and K-Rock is something else. All of these, broadcast legacy media companies have gone away in the place of something like iHeartMedia, right? Which it's a one unified portal for sending out content, which is, on its face differentiated. The stuff you hear, Z100, 105 site are different. The Latino station, 103.5. But as a proposition and from its source, undifferentiated. And that's something that's happened in music over the last 20, 30 years, as far as broadcasting it. But why is targeting important? Targeting communicates information coherently. Generally, a good audience target is one that for the thing you're trying to show them, everybody's going to have a similar response to it. So there's a high affinity between the type of content being shown and the audience. This illustration here is a heat map on the y-axis of different audience segments, demographic segments going down, and sound segments. So we take different types of sounds and classify them different ways on the x-axis. And here we have a very strong interaction between a sound and an audience. And it's a sound and audience that, for instance, are into, we should play. I just let the intro play a little bit so the beat comes on.
Siempre tengo en mente que todo acaba. Yo no me cansé de esperarte. Desde que le hablé y la miré la...
That type of beat has gone through different names over the years. I'll play the one from 2018. Different song, same beat.
We got a nice one, come on. Jay Alvarez.
Well, it's the same. Oops, a little bit faster. I didn't mean to click on the YouTube for that, sorry. And then I'll do the one 1996. I'll skip that 2018 one.
Canta, wow.
Again, you do the intro, and then...
Quieres campeón, campeona, no para ti, no para ti. Medito como Buda, escupo mierda por la boca como vaso hacia un cura. Tengo la cura, mis males, locura condensada.
What you're hearing is a consonance between the type of sound over 20 years, right? So this would be something which is even transcends genre. The genre for this has changed names, but sort of the underlying audience and their affinity for it, right? There's a strong sort of representation there. Another example of the link between audience and the sort of coherent experience that they have, if done properly, and sort of a targeted content. We can see here, these are heat maps similar to the one you saw on the slide before, where on the y-axis, we're doing demographic group, and on the x-axis, we're doing sound type. So again, we see in 2021, in October, a strong similarity in response between two different audiences of the same demographic target, though, one in Qatar, one in Jamaica. And so one, you're picking up this sort of co-location or synchronous sort of response to a particular sort of music in two very disparate geographic locations. What's happening in Qatar at that time, you had a lot of foreign workers, many of them West Indian, consumers of West Indian music, working and building the stadium for the World Cup. And it turns out the music patterns, and you can pick this up from the streaming music data, very similar. So targets exhibit similar behaviors and responses, and there are ways of picking up similarity in populations across geography. All right, so let's talk about affinity for a second. An affinity being a measure of an audience's predilection or receptivity to a certain content. So for the people who use Spotify, I imagine there's some Spotify users in the audience. They have, a feature called Fans Also Like, where they will suggest to you, you listen to this artist, fans, other people also like these other sort of artists. And here are two illustrations of data that were extracted from Spotify's use of Fans Also Like, and this was done in, I think, 2021. And so what you see here on the x-axis in the first left-hand side graph, Spotify's popularity index, or basically how popular is an artist. And the in degree here is, if this is the artist we're talking about in this yellow dot in the middle, the in degree would be all of the other artists who are attached to them, right? Giving a sense of how popular is that artist. And what you see here is a nonlinear pattern, right? You don't see, as their popularity goes up, that their in degree goes up, right? And you see a similar sort of phenomenon here on the right-hand side graph, where the neighborhood popularity, so just grabbing another artist, computing the popularity of that neighborhood, and the overall popularity of the artist are nonlinear. If they were, they would be on this line. So what's happening? So this is an illustration of Spotify measuring affinity, an artist's popularity, but using it or putting their thumb on the scale to push listening to other places, right? Like, okay, we have somebody, their popularity is this, let's guide them in another direction. So using this information on how much people like a certain sort of thing can be prescriptive, but can also be prescriptive where you don't use it directly or perfectly, where you have other agendas, where you're trying to sort of expand affinity or some other objective you're trying to meet using what you've learned about a target. And feel free to stop me at any time as I'm blabbing. Another illustration here too. So these are illustrations of what I like to call affinity maps. You take incidence data or coincidence data of listening on users, on platforms. You can construct maps of the sound and via the artists, via the coincidences, and then get a really sort of rich understanding of who's listening to what or how people are traversing a sort of sound landscape. And one thing I want to point out is that these sound landscapes that you can construct from data are not constant, and they even change within a day. For example, this is an illustration of a listening network, same group of people, population of people, but just at different day parts. Like the moon there is supposed to be at night, one's supposed to be in the morning, one's supposed to be in the afternoon. And you see what you get are different listening networks. What I like to say anecdotally there is, the sort of people who listen to, say, house music at 9 o'clock in the morning are very different from the people who listen to house music at 11 o'clock at night. And that affinity or the underlying target, like in the morning, they're exercising, doing yoga, 11 o'clock at night, they may be out at a club. These are different sort of use cases and different underlying populations. And so therefore you're going to see a different affinity map. One of the goals or utilities out of studying listener preference and constructing maps of listener preference along with the sound is it allows you to identify where there's genre emergence, where people are starting to listen to new things that may become popular. Staring at these for a while, say you were staring at maps like this in 2020 or 2021, you could say, hey, there might be a growth in country music. If you had been staring at these 2017 through 2019, you say, hey, looks like there's going to be a growth in Latin music, right? So you can pick up in behaviors, listener behaviors, where the sort of sound listening landscape is going. All right. Let me take a second here and sort of say why these things that you can notice and extract from listening behaviors are so novel and important. And the importance really comes from the fact that the way in which we consume, well, everything digitally is radically different from linearly or point of sale wise, but especially so in music, right? And I like to give the story from when I was a kid. I remember going to the record store with my dad and then buying first 2 records I ever got. And one record was sort of animal sounds. Like, for instance, maybe let this play for a couple seconds. It's going to be the sound of a hippopotamus. I got this record when I was 7 years old. I played this thing over and over again, almost every night. I was listening to animal sounds, the sound of a hippopotamus, other unexpected animals. The other record I got at the same time, first time I got my first LP, I'm that old, with my dad, was this one, Olivia Newton-John. So for those of you who remember, this was, I think, came out before her big album, Physical. I think the wood play is calming a little bit. But the point is, I played the first record, the animal sounds, every night. I maybe played that Olivia Newton-John record 5, 7 times. Even though it was really good. I'm not saying anything about the quality of the album. The record company received the same amount from the Hippo album that they did from the Olivia Newton-John albums. Point of sale. They only needed to excite my desire to purchase the album enough that I would go and plunk down the money for it, and then it's mine in perpetuity, and I go off and move on to other things. Now what happens? Now the record companies, the labels, content rights holders get paid for the fraction of time that during a period of time people are listening to their content, right? So when you release something and people listen to it, you get paid for the share of overall subscriptions on these streaming services that people listen to your stuff. And just because you release it and the song becomes old and goes into vintage catalog, doesn't mean it goes away. People pick it up again, listen to it, you'll get money from it again. So you go from a problem where you're trying to excite listening to point of sale to a stick-breaking problem, in the sense that everyone has a finite amount of time that they can listen to stuff. And how do I attract from that share of time a large enough fraction of it on my content? How do I get people into what I have at every point in time so that I can maximize the amount of money that I get from my inventory? I'll skip the last 2 pictures here. They don't need to, I can just, in the interest of time. And so a lot of what I learned that set the stage for me scientifically to investigate this, I learned back, this is a picture of me many years ago when I was in grad school, and I was a DJ. So I got into becoming a DJ because I collected records. I collected LPs mainly at that time because they were cheaper than CDs. I could go to yard sales and get LPs for cheaper. I developed a large record collection. The local bar near where I went to grad school had a open mic night. I went and I DJed and I got hooked from doing that. And so I did that. I had a radio show. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. But what I learned a lot was the content that I had and people's responses to it. Any good DJ is able to look at a crowd, get a sense of who they are, play them music, see how they respond to it, and decide what to play next, decide what people are into and how their content matches people's affinities. And the thing that you're appealing to as you match your content to affinity are cultural, sonic artifacts that are persistent and evergreen, things that have been in songs, you know, decades, if not hundreds of years. I want to give you some examples here. Take a listen to this one first. We'll just stop it there. So what he's doing is going through several, you know, new popular artists, recently released songs, and showing the antecedents for it, right? Some of them go back 50 years, some of them go back earlier than that. And whether we're aware of it or not, we build up a cultural sort of preference from being exposed to these sounds, and they're usable again and again and again. I want to show you this one here as well. And so, oops, let me go back. Replay this. Okay.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Mapa mata papa mapa mata papa mapa masani da mapa gamaga re gari maga gari gari maga re gari mama papa gama re gasa re ga mapa mata papa mapa mata pa mapa masani da mapa gamaga ka re gari maga gari maga ka re gari mama papa gama re gasa sa sa re re ka ka re re sa sa re re ka ka sa re sa sani da mapa तुझसे मिलना पुरानी दिल्ली में छोड़ आए निशानी दिल्ली में पल्ली मारा से दरी बेतलब तेरी मेरी कहानी दिल्ली में ओह काली कमली वाले को याद करते.
I love that. They go on for about another minute. You know, so the cultural references, right? They're not universal necessarily, and for different audiences, different audience segments, affinities, you know, aren't universal as well. This was a video that went viral, English language, it went viral. Millions of people saw it. And what they're doing is interpreting an old Bollywood movie, even down to, you know, recreating the bass line and the percussion with their hands. One of the reasons, in my opinion, that it went viral is because people had been exposed to this song through this very famous movie. All right. So what we're, you know, describing here, this sort of relationship between audience affinity for certain sorts of sounds, and the ability of people, a DJ or a producer, to manipulate it. I don't want to say lost art, but something that it wasn't unknown to people who make music, right? And I like to give this example to describe the phenomenon. And I give this example to people in the music industry who just aren't aware of it as well. So this is, I'll play the first song. I'll just play both of them first for your benefit. So everybody knows that song, right? Worldwide hit, Devo, 1981, Whip It, New Wave, probably ushered in the new wave sound in the United States. The sort of the bass line, that sort of a 5/4 half step thing at the end of it. Now listen to this, released in 1982. Because kids are still up, I won't play the whole Rick James video because it's a wow man. Rick James, in a documentary about him and his career, in the middle of some part of the documentary, he's having a discussion with his music producer about Devo and the Whip It song, and about how that song was a big hit, American sort of pop art audience, which were, you know, I'd say more racially disparate than they are now. And Rick was trying to develop a sound which was a mixture between funk and new wave on purpose, because he figured that there are strong audiences for both. So he's arguing with his producer and saying, I need to include something that sounds like Devo. When he hears, you know, that bass line and that half step change at the end of it, he argues that the producer's like, we don't need that, song's fine. Rick James won the argument, right? And this song has been sampled over and over and over. MC Hammer, I think it was sampled even 2 times in the last couple of years. But this awareness of an audience response to a particular sort of content, and that people who are sophisticated and sophisticated music is something that can be capitalized upon. So setting up the stage for the ability to now that we're aware of this phenomenon, how can we, I hate to use words like exploit, but I need to spend more time learning synonyms for words like that. Use, enjoy. How about that? How can we enjoy what we've seen here? And one of the ways that a way we can enjoy it is by taking sound, finding a representation of it, an informational representation, one a computer can use at scale, and then using that at scale to give us inference on which audiences will like which content, using the same sort of data that is used for constructing those maps of fans also like, right? So one of the first things to notice
Here's the difference between Western and Indian music.
I just want to play this.
You can think of Western music like a staircase. So when you sing the scales going up and down, it's kind of like you're stepping up and stepping down. So we use the major scale as an example. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, Now with Indian music, you get something like a trick staircase, where there's like random trapdoors. Like I mentioned before, we have little embellishments or curves in the middle called gamakas. There's different kinds of gamakas, but the one I've talked about most is called the kampita gamaka. A kampita gamaka is basically when you oscillate between 2 different notes. So for example, right here we have sa, re, ga, or do, re, mi. If you sang it without gamakas, it would just be plain. Na, da, da. But if you sing it with gamakas, you're gonna go sa, re, ga. Now I'm singing re, but actually the notation for that is gari, 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 gari. So I'm going back from here to here, and from here to here. So, gari, 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 ga. So these kampita gamakas are the ways we...
And I'll let that stop there. So one of the points I want to make, we're looking for representations of sound that are complete, that we can use in a predictive way, using listening behaviors. But one of the things that we also have to be aware of is that representation of sound may not be uniform across audience segments, right? Different audiences have different sort of cultural iconographies, different sort of sound memories, and we should match our processing of sound to one that is relevant for the audience at hand. So all that to say, one representation of sound here, what you see on the right-hand side are representations of sound via what's known as a spectrogram. So for example, I play this one. It's not playing for me. There it is. Right? That's just, I think that's A. Another one. More complicated one. The point here is that I can take a sound and I can represent it as an image, a spectrograph. There's a bit more that I need to do to it. I need to then take this spectrograph and perform a transformation of it that's relevant for the audience I'm looking to predict, right? So in this case, you know, we see different sort of melodic spectrums that we could use. One was the ordinary do, re, mi, one was the raga scale. But if I take the sound and I represent it in an information-rich way that I don't lose information, is it predictive in combination with data for preferences? The answer is yes, it is. I just put a picture there of Morgan Freeman. I just thought that'd be funny. It was back when he was with the electric company. So what we're essentially doing is taking representation of sound with respect to the audience that we're interested in predicting listening behavior for, and relating it to data on listening behavior. And the way that we do that is to take what's known as a melodic representation of the spectrogram, match that with these demand curves. Here, this is a demand curve for people listening to an Ed Sheeran song. How do we match it with the demand curves? The way we match it with the demand curves is by representing the demand curves in a way that's homeomorphic with the sound representation. Well, the sound representation is on what's known as a reproducing kernel Hilbert space. And a way to think of that is the sound representation is rich, and small differences in, say, the spectrogram redound to small differences in what you hear, in the way that the sound is actually presented. Can we do the same thing on the right-hand side for the thing we're trying to predict, which is demand? And the answer is yes. If we have a model for demand and we construct these demand curves from that model, as long as the model is a sufficient representation for demand and is also one that appeals to the frequency spectrum, i.e. is on reproducing kernel Hilbert space, we have something that should be lossless as it goes from sound to demand. And it turns out what you can use to represent the demand is a spline representation. Splines are just series of curves, and estimating a particular demand curve via a spline representation is more or less taking a frequency-based average of these curves, the one that best fits the demand curve. And this is old work. I'm going to say old work. This is from a paper I read years ago by a really famous statistician, Grace Waba, worked at Bell Labs for a long time. And it turns out that smoothing splines are a good choice. In fact, she proves this using the log periodogram, which is very close in representation to the melodic representation of the spectrogram. So we take these B-splines, we fit them to demand curves, we aggregate it in a way that's meaningful for us, and then we just stick it in a sort of light, I say simple, shallow layer neural network. On the inside, one input vector is a spectrogram via the septral coefficients. On the other side, the demand or affinity at an audience for a particular audience segment represented by these spline curves. And what we get out, these pictures on the right-hand side, are rich representations or predictions of how people will listen to things with curvature that matches the inflection points at which people sort of get bored of stuff. It turns out that for new sound, even just a new sound, you press on a keyboard or a synthesizer, the way you hear it is it reaches the peak and then it sort of dies off. Population-wise, in terms of demand and exposure to a sound, very similar dynamic. The affinity reaches saturation, the demand for it reaches a peak, and then it dies off with certain features. And we're able to pick that up mathematically using the spline representation. So we have a simple model between two series, sound and demand, ingesting a spectrographic representation on one side, outputting the spline representation on the other. Small differences in sounds, differences in demand, and it turns out they're predictive. Back to this first picture. What the picture was a predictive map for affinity for marketing for a Burna Boy song. Burna Boy is a Nigerian artist. And what it turns out is not only is this map predictive for affinity, the darker pink color being sort of stronger affinity, it's one that we could overlay with the cost of marketing for this artist in these locations. And so one of the things you discover is, and this is idiosyncratic for cohesive or coherent audiences, Nigerians in particular, if you expose the content to an audience and do it enough so that you get a nice reach that it hits a significant number of them, they communicate worldwide with everyone else. So you can pick a cheap place to market the song, know that if you just market it strongly there, the song will do well everywhere without you having to market other places because of that communication between that audience, this coherent sort of audience segment. Let me try to just finish up because I'm looking at 45 now. So another example, similar phenomena, was the sync deal for this Kate Bush song for Stranger Things. Stranger Things was looking for a song that had an appeal to a youthful demographic, but had a sort of 80s vintage to it. It turns out that when you look in the data, you can see kids have what I call a child sort of demo. If a child is exposed to the music basically their parents listen to, you can give them something in that area of the sound landscape. And what you see here on the upper left-hand side is a change in listening. She got a big hit out of it. And that change in listening is mainly in the younger demographic, people who are exposed to the song. This other song here is a similar version of that same phenomenon, but a different artist, French-speaking artist. You can do these things at scale. Like once you know what you're trying to target, you can, and you've got the sound represented, you can grab things, at will as subjects for the audience target you're interested in. So there's lots more, and there's lots more you can do. This is just one piece of things you can do in audience targeting with digital data. A lot of it has to do with audience segmentation, figuring out audiences from demand data, taking audience information and demand and joining it to other things about locations or people so that you can figure out traits and re-identify things. And then also optimizing once you've got an understanding of audience and audience targeting across the patterns. People like different things different times of year. It's as simple as saying people don't necessarily want to listen to Christmas music in July, right? And then just ending up, last slide here. So when I was a DJ, this was the song I would play every time I would start my show, Love to the World. Beautiful song, I love it. If you take anything from this talk, go play that song. A couple of the references I use. This is my DJ page on Mixcloud. That's Kate Bush, who had that song that was the sync deal. And that's it. That's my talk. Please ask me any questions you like. I'm going to shut up.
I have a question.
Yes.
So early on, you had that big fan of all the different, with like labeled genres all sort of split out. It looked like, behind the scenes, there's maybe like PCA making that like the top two components, making that splitting. I was sort of wondering like what went into, like what are the things that create that splitting and that create like
Oh,
I
the
don't know,
open
like,
set thing, you're talking about this one right here?
yeah, like
Yep.
EDM is close to disco, is close to dance or whatever. Like
Yeah.
what I was wondering what like is there some obvious labeling you could give to like the the two components, the two axes that
Yeah. So you're exactly right. These were this was in might as well in PCA, it was ICA, and we used the first two orthogonal axes so that we could plot it. This exists on a higher dimensional space, but you can't see that. So this is an illustration of a sound affinity map where we're searching for boundaries or open sets. So you can see here we exaggerate the illustration of the spaces between it, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for places where a set boundary is forming, so that we can classify it as a new genre.
So is it possible to, think about one of, those first two orthogonal axes as having any labels, like one is correlated with frequency and one is correlated with BPM, or is there anything you can like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to say I don't know the answer, and I don't know if it would be consistent. So what we saw in the axes is that, there were loadings all the way down to higher order dimensions, right? It wasn't like it loaded on one thing and then we could say, oh, that's this or that's this other thing, and then to take like a similar plot and again and do it on a couple other attributes. Do these look alike? Okay, well, this loading must be, to try to infer like a semanticity from the loadings for the axes. I think, yeah, that's probably a useful thing to sit and think about. When we made this plot, I didn't see anything in the loadings that seemed open to sort of immediate interpretation. We were just looking for something that could look nice, and we could illustrate the openness or boundary creations on. But it's possible that these component sort of separation algorithms can convey something about the sound landscape. That's possible.
Right, thank you. I mean, you do see a lot of splitting, so it feels like there's something there.
So when we hit each one of these, we're like, essentially what you're looking for is significance in a chi-square statistic on the tightness of clusters, and you basically search each node for that. And what we did in the illustration is where we found that we just added some room around it, with respect to the plot, so it looks more open. Then yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Okay, I'll try. This is a little above my head, but I'll try anyway. So it sounds like there's some reason to believe that songs going viral have a lot to do with what the audience has heard before, and you made that case about antecedents. So does that also follow that if I'm an artist who wants my work to go viral, I could actually do this statistically and have a better chance of going viral? And how far can that be pushed, and ethically should we push it?
I think so. So first of all, my answer, my opinion, is yes. And one of the things that we've worked on is like a metering tool that, as a song is played, to illustrate where, in audience segments, that is resonating. Hey, this chorus really resonates with 17 to 25, and have that as a sort of way of tuning a sound as you're making it in production, right? And getting a sense of where it's going to land, sonically, before you finish it and package it and send it off. I don't feel like horrible about it. I think that that's a useful thing to do, especially from having spent time at a major label where all sorts of other packaging or roping is done that has nothing to do with the sound and the way that people might enjoy it, right? And so those things go on. At the same time, and I think that's what you're saying in the second part, is that a negative thing for being artistic? And I do think that can go in the direction of being anti-artistic. I think one of the things that really good artists are able to do is to create something that has that sense of familiarity, but also evokes a novelty. And I think that's what makes a really special creation or song, right? I mean, I think back to like reggae. Why was reggae such a big deal? Was the combination of all these cultures, Irish, African sounds, and together, right? And then when people heard it, whether they realized it or not, this unique combination, completely novel. So I don't think, while it's useful, I still think there's a bit in the way that the artist combines things that makes something special.
So how accurate can we be in forecasting? Can we build a tool for the artist to know just how well the song will do?
So we're pretty accurate in forecasting, and we have built a tool which conveys to record labels how well their artists should be doing on particular audience segments, right? And if they market more, like what they should get out of it. But it's relatively accurate. I'll say this, and this may be consonant with what you're saying, and so I hear you, because I feel the same way. I think one of the reasons the tool we built is pretty accurate is because there's not that much adventure in popular music creation, right? Like we're using the same ingredients over and over and over again. So things that are really truly different maybe would be less precise and less easily predicted. But of course we might like them. They might be nice.
I have to admit that this is, for me, this a little bit sad. Like I notice there is a very nice visualization of NBA games from, I think, 80s till now, and the visualization is like you see the field, and the ball is placed where the most shoots are, like effective shoots. And then you can see, like, by the years, actually the games become kind of boring because all the shoots are from the same place. They shoot for 3 points or just close to the basket or whatever is the correct name.
Yeah.
And this is like horrible. It's killing the sport to some extent. Yeah. Like I discussed with some people that they don't like to watch professional sport anymore because it's like all calculated. They can have feeling that this is also true for music to some extent, yeah. All these pop artists, they sound so similar. They are like kind of.
I'll say a couple of things. One, I don't disagree about basketball. I remember watching a game, the Brooklyn Nets, and they were trying this thing out where it was a different camera, and the camera was sort of at an angle from the basket, and it was the same thing every time the Nets would come down to their side of the basket. Kevin Durant would stand in the same corner and he would wait. Somebody would pass him the ball, he would take a shot. Then they go run back. And it was the same thing, very formulaic. And I don't disagree that there's a tendency to, you overanalyze something and it becomes formulaic. The one thing I will say, well, let me say a couple of things. First, as far as predictivity, like what people will like, I think that these things change. Like, for instance, we train a model on what people like 2 years ago. We'll see, it won't be very precise a year from now, 4 years from now. There's still sort of currents of things and sort of randomness that happen through populations that change preferences or make things, more popular or less popular. And, that's sort of a beautiful thing. And then the third thing I'll say is, I from having spent some years at the record company, I think so much of what happens that's sort of undirected and, not driven by science is sort of banal already, right? Like, let's take an artist and make them wear these ridiculous clothes, or a rapper and have them say these awful things, because we know this sells. I remember having a conversation with one of the principals of a large record label, talking about, we can make music and be more predictive. And she was like, oh, it's just what the kids like. It's just what the kids like. And I was like, well, I mean, we expose the kids to the worst possible stuff and then expect them to choose from it, right? And call that creativity. So I think that used properly, like insight into how people like stuff and sort of the deeper sort of, musical content and knowledge, can be helpful at making, better stuff. And, getting people off of sort of the basest and coarsest possible music product, right?
No, it's very reasonable stuff. It's just the end goal, the end solution is kind of, well, to some extent, it's nice sometimes to live in the world that it's not predictable, yeah. But of course, we have data, we should use it. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I'll say it this way. Like, so I think in absence of a sense of like what's going on with people and how can I see what they might like, what you get from the music labels, my opinion, is sort of the worst possible content, right? Like McDonald's plops themselves in the middle of a country. They don't know the local cuisine. They don't know what people like. They just, fats and sugars. That's what we're going to sell them because we know that works, right? And if you have more insight, you can make a better sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Cool. Thank you for the question.